This meeting is being recorded.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, Jessica. I'm so grateful for you to be able to make it today because whenever we meet, we talk about subjects that are very useful for others to tune in as well. And autism is something that I have encountered because of my son, and you actually, have encountered autism in so many ways by being a victim yourself, and then having to be a counselor, then even with your boys, right? So there's just we're going to be basically the subject is autism, and it's all about diving into the subject and seeing where it goes. So Jessica and I actually met. I think we met at Lake Forest Book Club, and
Yes.
and I was very intrigued about you being an author. And of course, I did not know that Jessica has written books more, not just on haunted house and haunted subject, but other subjects as well, right? Because when I was reading your bio, I was like, you've written 10 books. And of course, you're a licensed professional counselor, and you have been working in the industry as a counselor for 30 years. So you have a direct experience dealing with a whole bunch of, spectrum of people with challenges where they are not following the norm or whatever the standard of norm behavior is, right?
Right.
So yeah, please go ahead and fill in the gaps where I have missed something.
I like the way you put that, where they're not fitting the norm, because a lot of times we do make people with mental health issues appear broken, right? Like, so instead of putting that brokenness on them, you just out of the norm, right? And that's kind of the way I think the new perspective on autism especially is, right? That you're not born broken, you're born different, right? So that's why, like, the new movement, the puzzle piece used to be the symbol of autism, but now we're moving towards the infinity circle with a rainbow.
Oh, wow.
Because that represents the spectrum, right? And we're on a spectrum, but we're not broken, we're just different, right?
Exactly.
The way we think, the way we relate, everything is different. Right?
Exactly, because when I was looking at the definition of autism, right? So the definition of autism is someone who has a brain that operates a little bit differently, and because of that, their social cues are not as perceived by others as that they're up to the par in their social skills, and sometimes it impacts the language skills as well. So to me, like, I always look at everything as a dimmer switch, because like we all have a different intensity in that same switch, and when it's all the way on versus all the way off. And I have not lived a normal life by any means in so many ways, I can tell you that. So to me,
what is normal, right?
Exactly. So you
That's the question I ask myself every day. I don't know what normal is, because it depends. Yeah, what is normal?
Exactly, because it becomes a perception of one person's, like, if one person thinks that the square is the only way to live and you're a circle, how are you going to fit in that?
Right. And that's kind of what autism is. So the actual diagnostic criteria is marked impairment in social interactions, marked impairment, you have to meet all four, right? Marked impairment in communication, marked impairment or restricted, repetitive, and stereotyped behaviors and interests. And the last one is it has to have been present all your life. So this isn't like something like schizophrenia pops up when you're, usually in your 20s, that's the norm. But autism is something you're born with. You're always different, and you can see it in the kids that have it, right? They're just different, right? So, but then, when you look at that, right, no, we don't pick up on the social cues of neurotypicals, but studies have shown that we do really well when we're together, right? Like if you put me with another autistic person, we can usually blend pretty well, right? We understand each other. We speak the same language. It's just not neurotypicals, right? So we're different, but it's not that we can't communicate. We just don't always understand normal people, right?
And it could be that you guys are sensitive enough that you pick up on cues when you're not being accepted by the people around you because you are acting different than they are, right? And it could be that triggers you to be even more not normal. You see my point? Like sometimes during that effect, the cause and effect is always at play in everything, like Newton's third law of motion. So I wonder that's why, like when you're with the same peer, you feel like now you no longer have to struggle with that part. So you feel more at ease, and then it becomes an easier communication.
Well, I think one of the Yeah, one of the hypotheses is that, it's not just at ease. One of the hypotheses I've heard is that people with autism are actually more in tune with people's emotional states. And it feels kind of like chaos to us because we can't necessarily interpret it, but we know that the way a lot of normal people present is not the way that they feel. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So if we're having this meeting now, I may be able to sense that you're not doing well today. But if you're smiling, right, and you're talking and acting happy, I get really confused and overwhelmed, right? And then I respond incorrectly because I don't know. So, we don't know how to respond because we can interpret emotions, but we can't interpret what is socially normal. So, we don't understand if you're like crying on the inside and you're smiling at me and talking at the same time.
Right, right.
That makes no sense to us. Like,
Yeah, because
that is one of the
you are more
hypotheses.
transparent in that sense. And of course, for the most part, to live in this world, you have to kind of show up in a certain way because, like I actually learned, and I have to share this with you because it almost sounds like a joke. But when I came to America, I noticed that the greeting in Pakistan is Assalamu alaikum, right? Which actually means peace be upon you, right? So it's very different type of greeting. But here people actually say, how are you? So when I came to America, and I was, by the way, so I'm at UCRY and I'm a computer consultant and I'm dealing with a whole bunch of people learning English and engineering at the same time. And people are asking me, how are you? And I would explain them exactly how I was because I wasn't very good. And they were not interested in that. So I actually learned the hard way that nobody cares to know how are you. They're only saying it because it's part of the greeting. And I'm supposed to say fine, even if I'm not. And it really kind of messed me up. So I was kind of a little bit, I can relate to what you're saying just from that perspective, that the culture also has a layer of expectation on how you need to show up in the world,
Well, and I think that part of autism is we also have difficulty understanding lying and deception. So that question, for most of us, how are you, is like one of the deeper challenges because I really have trouble lying. I mean, because I feel it feels wrong, right?
Exactly.
So if I'm having a bad day and everything's chaotic and you ask me, how are you? I'm going to say it is what it is or something, but I'm never going to say fine because it just feels like a constant lie. Right? The falsities and the social niceties. And that's where the social impairment, as it's called, comes in, because I'm not really, you always know how I feel. Not by my face, because my face never does the right thing, but because I'm not good at lying or covering up how I'm feeling or what's going on with me. But in normative society, that's a social impairment, right?
Which
Because I'm not supposed to say I'm doing crap today.
I know, but see, that to me is lying. And I agree with you because actually I come from a culture where it's all about honesty and all about integrity. And so, but I've learned that, okay, everybody's not interested in knowing your entire life story because majority of the people are asking just as a politeness, right? They're asking because they've been doing that all their lives. So at the end of the day, yeah, it's a confusing world because as I said, for me also, I had to adopt to the English culture and the language. And I felt like it was not as transparent as I like to be. And then ultimately what you do is you surround yourself with people who knows you that you're going to be very upfront because I'm very upfront too. And I'm sure you've noticed that. Like if you ask me a question, you'll get the real answer, but are you ready? Are you okay to hear it? Because you ask, so I'm going to give you straight.
Sorry, my cat.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm sure that she's sensing. So, isn't it animal actually, because they're very in tune with the, the energy, the electromagnetic field of the human being and the aura. They are aware when you are feeling a certain way and they come to you almost sometimes to calm you down.
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things I love, I have a service dog, right? And he goes everywhere with me. He comes to work, he goes to the grocery store, right? And I love studying the theory behind autonomic nervous system and the way that we connect, because there is from a scientific perspective, right? Our autonomic nervous system does something called co-regulating.
Okay.
And all higher level vertebrates do it. And it's, if we're living in a tribal situation or for a dog in a pack situation, the way it works is it's our fight or flight system. So, if I see a tiger, my sympathetic nervous system kicks on and all my resources physiologically marshal so that I can fight or run said tiger. That's the sympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the sister system, acts to help us bond with other human beings, but also gives us this beautiful tool called co-regulation, where we can feel each other's emotions.
Okay.
Right. And how that helps, like, in a tribal situation is, if I can feel you're panicking, then when I see the tiger, when you see the tiger, I know there's something going on. So we can so when you see animals, higher level vertebrates move in synchrony when they see a predator, that's that autonomic nervous system kicking in. So that's why we can bond with animals, right? Because they also have an autonomic nervous system. And for people with PTSD, which also damages the autonomic nervous system, and autism, because autism is also autonomic nervous system damages there. That's why we have a lot of trouble with that, co-regulating with other humans. Having a support animal or a service animal can help, because it helps you reattune your autonomic nervous system to, especially the parasympathetic, to bond with another higher level vertebrate.
Wow, that is pretty interesting. So co-regulating is the terminology that you're using, that is tied to the parasympathetic part of it.
Right.
Wow. And see, I mean, and that's incredible, right? And that's why I can see, because, animalism is another thing that in America is very predominant. Majority of the household does have animals, and people actually do feel more sad when their animal leaves versus when they get divorced, because they have, it's like the bond that they have is unexplainable.
Right. It's that higher level vertebrate attunement that's part of our parasympathetic nervous system that's always happening, and we don't even know it's happening. And I think for people on the autism spectrum, people with PTSD, a lot of times we can't bond with humans that way, but so we end up with closer bonds with our animals, because we can bond with animals that way.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, I think that was.
So the divorce isn't a big deal if we're not bonded with the person we divorced, but
I mean,
the animal is a big deal.
It makes sense, right? And of course, when it comes to divorce, of course, it pretty much means that you are not really able to live like the way you would like to. And I think it serves both parties ultimately to not be together, even though always one person doesn't, react as well as the other one, the one who initiates. But at the end of the day, if one person is not happy, then the other one cannot be happy. It makes no sense. To me, you need two hands to clap, just like you need two people to truly be happy with each other. It can't be one or the other. It can't be that one is happy and the other one is not, because to me, it's a cause and effect again with the relationship, right? So it's interesting how some people have challenges, when they divorce, because the other person who doesn't want to initiate it always reacts sometimes more, with them, and creates a lot of challenge. So
I'm going to excuse myself for just 1 minute, because my cat opened the door and I have a small child that is making a lot of weird noises. So I'm going to go take care of the situation.
I'll pause.
This meeting is being recorded.
So that's very good. So, when I was reading your bio, you said that you actually are a huge advocate of neuro-affirmative approach. Can you explain what that is?
So the history of autism is, I want to say, a toxic history. So it started, the first diagnosed cases were in like 1942. And the studies were all done with these, what's now known as like level 2 and 3, the more impaired autistic people, right? And they were all male, and they all had very severe glitches and issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and they were primarily brought to treatment because of serious behavioral problems. And if you've ever seen an autistic child at their worst, you know what these are, like the really bad meltdowns, the really bad tantrums, the sensory aversions that lead to tics, right? Communication issues for people who have autism can go one of two ways. I'm hyperverbal, like I could talk at 9 months, and like my mom always says that I started talking at 9 months and I never shut up. And then the other way is nonverbal. So you get a lot of kids that, they don't talk at all, right? So you had these really severely impaired or more severely impaired kids that were the initial cases. And the primary goal of those cases was, the treatment of those cases was to get them to act normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
So every treatment initially around autism was based on how do we get these kids to act what they called normal. And so the initial treatment that came out was something called applied behavioral analysis, which was based on classical conditioning. And it was really just designed to take children that were autistic and had social impairments and communication impairments and teach them how to behave as expected. Now, recent research has shown that that increases levels of PTSD, because even if I act normal, even if today, you know, and I'm really good at that. You knew me when I was masking heavily at Lake Forest, right? Trying really hard. The toll is high emotionally, because it's a lot of work for us to reproduce what seems like normal behavior to people. And emotionally, it's exhausting and draining. And like for me, I could only interact with other humans for like an hour or two at a time, because it was so exhausting to pretend to be normal for 2 hours that I just felt depleted afterwards. So all of the treatments had this singular goal to teach us to mask, to act normal, because it was believed that that's what was best, you know, because then you can have friends and you can have a normal life and everything's happy if you can just be normal, right? So since we've learned that there are negative repercussions from these treatments, applied behavioral analysis, the new treatment is kind of is neuro-affirmative, right? It's teaching us that it's okay for you to be weird. It's okay for you to be different. And people may not like you, and people may be off-put by you, and people may talk about you behind your back. And all of that is okay, as long as you're happy within yourself. You don't have to be. And you know that the goal then becomes to teach you how to find people like you, right? So how to find your own divergent tribe, as opposed to seeking out people that are going to expect you to act normal, right?
Right. So that actually, everything you just said applies to pretty much anybody, whether you have autism or not, because, you know, anybody who's not matching up with their real alignment is taking a toll on their energy field. And the more sensitive you are, because I'm very sensitive to energy field, I feel people, I'm very intuitive in that way. And naturally, sometimes I'm like, if you're surrounded by people who are taking your, you know, like they use the word emotional vampire, right? Like what happens is that they actually like people who are willing to give them the energy so that they can take it. And then it's an unbalanced situation. And, you know, you can do it only for so long. And ultimately, it's going to show up as a disease or show up as a, you know, like a stress, or show up in so many different ways. So I think everything that you just mentioned about interacting with autism or dealing with autism applies to anybody and everyone, because we all need to truly be more real to ourselves, so we don't have to exert so much energy in showing up, right, in a certain way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, you know, the issue with autism is the answers to autism are the answers to, as you say, everything. The problem is that everything's been put on us more extremely, because our behavior is so odd to normal people, right? You know, in normal situations, I'm almost always flicking my hands or my fingers, right? And that's normal, like, you know, and for me, right? But to suppress that, I end up like, for years, you know, in order to keep my hands still, I would pick at them until they bled. Right? Because that was the toll it took for me to be still. Like I have trouble being still. Like we have tics and glitches, and you know, and that's called stimming, stimming, you know, the movements of the hands, right? But we all have these little glitches, and we try to repress them because we're told that it's really weird, right?
Right. Especially because for someone who doesn't have to, it's like, you know, you're aware of it, right? It's like something's constantly moving. You can, of course, notice it because everything else is not. So
Right.
I didn't know that, like in the process of suppression, you're almost like a little bit hurting yourself, like you said, right? And physically too, not just emotionally, but you're hurting yourself physically if you're bleeding while you're stopping yourself from moving way too much. And then you're the only one who knows the pain of having to be that person, you know, who needs to be following the norm or whatever that means.
Yeah, and it's a lot of energy, like, you know, since I don't know what to do with my face, a lot of energy goes into when I'm in normative population, like, because my face, and, you know, I've been accused by friends of being narcissistic or pompous because in general, my face is flat. I'm not super responsive.
Okay.
You know, and things like that are huge in social issues, because, you know, you seem cold or aloof, or, you know, because I don't always know what I'm supposed to be doing behaviorally. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Or is it possible that you're just more real in a way? Like, because you have, like, you know, your processing is busy being real.
Well, I feel like, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of arguments with autism that, you know, we are the more real people, because for the most part of what, you know, one of my communication difficulties is that I just say whatever I'm thinking, right? Like, so if I'm mad at you, I'm going to be like, I'm mad at you. And, and then we'll talk about it, right? But, in normative society, me coming up to a stranger and saying, your shirt's weird is very inappropriate, right? But that's kind of just like it's work for me to shut it down. Like, and sometimes I can feel it happening, like I shouldn't be saying this right now.
Right.
But I do it in any case, right?
Yeah.
Because whatever I'm thinking is just what comes out of my mouth if I don't work to shut it down.
Exactly. I think that to me, like, just like, and of course it's hard for probably for artistic people to balance it. But to me, at the end of the day, we all need to work on a little bit of balance, of course, right? Like, because it just makes it easier on us, easier on other people, because everybody has their own story going on, right? They have their own mess going on, they have their own challenges going on. So of course, you don't want to impose that on other people, all your mess to them. But at the end of the day, when somebody expects you to be doing something that is just way beyond your threshold, right? Like you're saying, then it takes a toll on you. So, and it shouldn't be that way, because, we have to accept everyone with all their differences, right? And all their challenges, because yeah, we live in this world with 8 billion human, but none of them are same from each other. I mean, we all have different fingerprints, right? For a reason. So we are all different from each other, and we should kind of be more embracing of what that difference is, because that's just the way we can integrate the different aspect of our own selves. Because even like I always joke sometimes that, like, if somebody makes a clone of you, right, you may even have a hard time living with your own clone.
Right, of course. Well, because I mean, we've done as psychologists, we've done tons of research, mostly through identical twin studies, right?
Yeah.
Even if you have pretty much exactly the same DNA, if you're raised in a different environment, you'll be different, right? Nobody's raised in exactly the same environment. It's not possible. I mean, like, even if you have the same parents in the same household, that birth order and little things shift slightly. So none of us are exactly the same.
Exactly. And then the very fact that if you have a clone and if the clone is standing in a certain place, space and time, you are standing in a certain space and time, both of you have a different perspective already, because you're looking at everything that you're seeing from a different angle. So right there, that's a big variable, and that just creates all these different variables. So therefore, it can never be 100% same.
Yeah. And so I mean, I do think the lessons of autism should be spread out. So I wrote an article for Psychology Today. It's one of my favorites, and it was about Big Bang Theory. Have you seen this show?
Yes, I love it. Yes.
So, and my theory is that that's the example of the goal is for autism is what's called the double empathy problem, if we're being neuro-affirmative. And that goal is that, up until this point, autistic people are supposed to try to work to learn what the neurotypical world is and how to pretend to be like it. So the double empathy problem is that instead of it just being all the oneness put on us, it should be also on the rest of society. And so, as in they should also learn us. So we need to learn each other. And I use the Big Bang Theory as an example of how that would go in a perfect world, right? Because you have like people that are essentially a lot of people that are autistic, like Sheldon Cooper's clearly autistic, Amy Farrah Fowler's clearly autistic. I think Raj is probably autistic too, and Wallowitz. I don't know. They're not quite as stereotypical, right? But despite the fact that they're weird and they say and do weird things and people find them somewhat off-putting at times, the neurotypical population works to understand them and love them in any case, right?
Yeah.
And, at some points, Sheldon and Amy Farrah Fowler are both challenged to try to, understand their friends too. Right. But it's not just Sheldon needs to act normal, Amy needs to act normal. It's everybody needs to work to understand one another. And that's the goal. And I think that's not just for autism, that's for everything, right?
That's for everything, because no matter what, whether autism or not, majority of the relationship, whether it's friendship, whether it's a romantic relationship, it just doesn't work out because of that lack of understanding, right? Because nobody, like the fact that you cannot live with your own clone already tells you that no matter whom you live with, you're going to have to spend some energy in making sure that you can integrate well with each other, because it's not going to be like as simple as drinking a glass of water. It's just not going to be.
No, I mean, so it's the double, the end goal is double empathy, that we all try to empathize with each other to the best of our ability. and that other people reciprocate, right? And yeah, that's the new perspective on autism, right? That you just realize that we're not normal and that's okay.
Exactly. And I love that neuro-affirmative approach, like you're saying, is that rather than constantly trying to fit in somebody else's box, you actually are going to work on making sure that you accept, first of all, that this is the way you are, and
Yeah.
don't try to change that, because in the process of changing it, you're going to be very unhappy.
Right, right. And that's, where we have, there's been a number of research studies into mortality with autism. And for the average autistic person's lifespan is 58, because in general, the suicide rate is exceptionally high. Because, people with autism historically have lived isolated lives, right? They have trouble connecting with other human beings. So the goal, and since they have trouble connecting with other human beings, and other human beings tend to not understand us and not try to connect us or find us off-putting or difficult. As a kid, you hear it all the time, because everything that's weird about us is worst when we're kids. So, you're a difficult child, you're the hard child, you're the weird child, your parents are always telling you don't act right and there's something wrong with you, I heard that growing up all the time. It's, what's wrong with you? Why can't you act right? And we literally, I didn't even know what they were talking about as part of the problem, because to me, and it's still a problem, people, I got into a huge fight with my son's teacher, and they hate me at his school because, she said, your son doesn't respect the teachers. I'm like, well, I don't know what that means. And they thought I was just being catty or difficult, I guess. I don't know, but they got really upset. But I really have trouble pinpointing a lot of these vagaries that humans are just supposed to understand.
Right,
what does it mean to respect someone? What is this specific subset of behaviors I'm supposed to exhibit? Am I supposed to be smiling? Am I supposed to be making eye contact? Because I hate making eye contact. I don't want to do that. That's very uncomfortable for me. Am I supposed to be, what specifically are you expecting me to be doing with my face that indicates at this moment I'm respecting you?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that's a very good thing, because, because everything boils down to the perception, right? So if somebody thinks that your son did not respect the teacher, then probably they have to give an example, right? Like what exactly did that make them appear to be that way? And then you can probably gauge it. And it could be that you may not even agree with it, but at least you understand where they're coming from.
Right. But I think that's a huge problem in general with autism, is that we don't understand. I don't understand, and most of us don't understand these vague things that society takes for granted that we should understand. You need to respect, you need to, do this. And I don't even know what that means. Don't be difficult. How am I being difficult? Explain it to me specifically. And then they're like, well, you're being difficult now. I'm like, what? By asking how not to be difficult, I'm being difficult.
So it kind of gets into really, yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just a pretty messy situation, right? Because until you clarify, and the person, I think, and that's where I think that maybe, and since we're having this conversation, I guess, so one of the things that I would like you to ask you is that what you are basically saying is that don't make assumption, right? When you're dealing with people who are different than you, that they truly see the world the way you do, because that just creates a lot of confusion.
Right. And I feel like, because I've been working with autistic people a long time now, in general, one of our largest problems is that we overanalyze everything. So things that should be simple become much more complex than for us, right? We'll talk, I'm trying to think of a good example. I think respect is actually one of the best examples, something that I think most people intrinsically understand what it is to respect people. I will have 3 or 4 sessions with clients trying to nail down specifically the subset of behaviors that neurotypicals expect us. And then we'll get into huge debates. Well, this neurotypical told me that if I did this, it wasn't, and we'll never actually, because everything has to be put down to some sort of systemic thing that is more concrete. Does that make sense? Anything vague is difficult for us. It has to be concrete.
So then explain the fact that, in your case, I mean, of course, you didn't know that you had autism. You probably felt maybe, but you were not diagnosed until you were 40. So you have been working, of course, with your degrees, helping everybody else cope with people who have autism, with children who have autism. So what is one thing? So by default, you understood them better because of your knowledge base, right? Because you went to school to understand that. But in your case, you actually have personal experience because you have the similar attributes. So,
Yes.
so it actually.
When I think that's, yeah, I think after a while, that's why I loved working with adults with autism, because I related more to them than I did to anybody else.
Okay.
And for some reason, it never clicked with me, probably because I'm autistic, that there probably was a reason that I related more to my clients with autism than I did to like my friends in the outside world that made no sense to me. Like when I sat in session with my adults with autism, like I was like, yeah, I get that. I get what you're feeling. I understand that. And then I would go out and go to parties and, where people would be doing the I call it prittle prattle. What is it? Just talking about nonsense. You know how people just talk about
gossip,
nonsense?
you mean? Like gossip.
Like small talk, that's what it's called.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't know, it just seems like a massive waste of time. And I don't know why people do it. And it seems to serve absolutely no functional purpose in anything, like, because you're not really getting to know the person more when you do it. And you're not engaging in anything that's interesting. You're just like standing with a person just to like say things to the person. And it makes no sense, right? And, but when I'm with another autistic person, the conversation is always about something, right? It's, we're talking about chess, or we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons, it's a subject, and it's interesting and it's engaging, as opposed to, I don't even know where I got off on this tangent, but I feel like, at the end of the day, the core thing is, I didn't discover I had autism because the way I was taught autism when I was in grad school, and my whole life was like that movie Rain Man. Mm-hmm. Right? Where autistic people are just sitting in the corner doing this, rocking back and forth. And in grad school, I was exposed a little to ABA, applied behavioral analysis, and it was all with boys who were nonverbal and, were like the most extreme examples, right? There was this stereotype. Mm-hmm. And I feel like because we were taught autism that way, we didn't actually learn autism, right? And so it wasn't until I was in my 40s that I actually began to understand what autism actually was and break free from all the stereotypes. Because I think the most toxic thing right now is stereotypes, right?
Exactly. And that's for everyone. That's for everyone. And that's the interesting thing about this conversation we're having, is that I'm actually learning that, like everything that we're learning on dealing with autistic people, we need to apply it, because to some extent, because nobody is going to be, everybody has something going on that makes them different than the other person, right? Yeah. And we need to start understanding the differences and embracing them to the point where we can live with them in harmony.
Yes. Yeah. That's it. And it's not just about autism. Like, I think that's what's beautiful about neurodivergent people in general, which includes things like ADHD and, all sorts of different, just essentially brainscapes, right? Is that we do work to understand each other, right? Like, if I'm sitting with someone with ADHD and I see they're doing all sorts of weird stuff and they can't sit still and, they're having trouble focusing, I don't judge, right? And I feel like that's why we can get along with all different like I can get along with anyone who's neurotypical, but I feel like the problem comes with anybody who's neurodivergent. But I feel like the problem comes is a lot of neurotypical people expect everyone to see the world their way. Oh, so that's okay. So explain me, neurotypical means people expect you to see the world their way. And neurotypical people are just people that are, like neurologically, within normal range, right? You don't have autism, you don't have ADHD. Right. You're just like a normal brain sitting there, right? Right. And they take for granted that there are things that everybody will understand. Exactly. Like everybody will enjoy small talk. Everybody can make eye contact. Like that's a big thing people with autism have trouble with, is eye contact is strangely painful. I can't explain that. And I can relate to my son, my oldest one. He does not make eye contact. And the thing is that I am actually a little bit saying that, especially he wants to add new relationship in his life. So I'm actually, and maybe he needs to get some session with you, because of course I have no idea, right? So I'm just saying that if you don't make eye contact, then people don't feel like you're talking to them. I mean, from my perspective, it's just very simple. If I don't look at you and I look somewhere else, then am I talking to you or am I talking to something else? You see my point?
So
Yeah, yeah.
how do you address that, by the way? That's a very simple case. Like
I tell people, I mean, I'm at a point now where I'm like, really, everything's out there, right? Like,
right.
you know, so I'm like, I'm autistic. And so if I'm looking over here, like, I honestly can look at you if you're not looking at me. Like, so, you know, in therapy sessions, people are like, you know, well, how are you a therapist? And I look at people intensely, but then when they look at me, that's when I'm like, okay, you know, uh, because
Exactly.
it really is the eye contact that makes it uncomfortable. But the way I look at it is I just tell people, I'm not gonna meet your eyes, right? Like that feels like, I don't know, it almost
Yeah.
feels like too much.
No, but it actually, because you're self-aware, right? And of course, you are a little bit different because first of all, you actually understand this better than most of the people. You studied it, you have it, you've dealt with it. So you come from many different perspectives. Plus, you're very self-aware of your own self in a way that you can explain that. And see, everybody's not in the same boat. So they can't communicate their story like that. So that's why it creates a more confusion. To me, someone like you will have an easier time interacting with neurotypical people than somebody who is, neurodivergent, right? That's the word you're using, right?
Well, I mean, you would think I would, but you know, like I don't have that many friends that I can maintain, right? Like, you know, we met through the Lake Forest Ladies Wine Group, right?
Right, right.
You know, how many of those women still like me and want to talk to me? Almost zero. I mean, you know,
Well, you can make it one though, because I'm talking to you.
right. But, you know, I have done things that, you know, and people misinterpret a lot of the things I do. And yeah, so, I mean, I do struggle continuously with human interaction. It's not easy or okay. And yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I have a couple close friends and they're probably not neurotypical, they're neurodivergent like me. You know, dating is a nightmare because, you know, I got divorced too. And
Right.
that's like the worst thing for someone with autism because, you know, you're put in this environment where everybody's essentially lying to get things, right? Like people are rarely honest on a date, you know, and that's impossible for me to suss out. Like I have no idea what's going on there, and flirting. Oh my God. When you just say whatever you're thinking when you're dating, that's not a good thing.
But in that accord, I have to tell you, I'm in the exact same boat. I have not dated and I've been single for a while and I'm ready to date now. And I'm learning that I probably don't understand the man species because like I truly am very transparent and honest and straightforward. You ask me a question, I'll answer. And then a lot of time they make you wait for things. And I'm like, I'm not going to play any kind of game.
Yeah, there's some sort of ritual or game that I completely don't understand. And there's a list of things you're supposed to say and not say. And, you know, people, I tell them what I do on dates and people are like, what, you really did that? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, no, you never do that. I'm like, why not? You know,
Exactly.
like if I'm interested in someone, I'll just look at them and say, yes, I find you attractive, but you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to lead them on or something
Well, I
for
know. See, I'm
some period of time.
So I think that I probably am artistic according to that because I'm truly exactly in the same boat, Jessica, as you are. And the interesting thing is, I have a friend who has written many books on dating, and she even found her partner through that process. And she actually told me that there is a method to the madness, and you have to follow that. Otherwise, it's not going to happen for you. And I said, well, if that's the case, then I'm good because you know what? I'm not going to play any of the game. And if I'm not supposed to have a mate because of that, then I'm going to be just fine the way I am because I'm not interested in playing any games. So I agree with you on that accord.
Well, I mean, and it's also a struggle for me with groups of women because groups of women tend to be strangely duplicitous and play games as well. Like, you know, and I don't want to mention any names, but within friend groups I've been part of, you know, there ends up being, you know, lying and people doing things that I feel are unethical and then they're talking about each other. And like almost every group I'm part of, there's, you know, people like spreading, I don't know if you've noticed this, like talking about stories about you that didn't even happen. And it's like, I don't know. And yeah, it's a lot of small talk and talking about and I don't even understand what they're doing or why they're doing it. It makes no rational sense to me. Like I'm good at being a therapist. That's the one way I can human because there's all this learning that goes into, and you know this because I think with your Eastern philosophy, you have many of the same perspectives into we know how to make people happy, right? There's a recipe that I can teach you, and there are ways that I can teach you to cope with PTSD, right? And if you're completely honest with me in a session, there's this beautiful harmony where it's just learning and growing, right?
Exactly.
But that's never the case in social situations.
And
I
I
don't know
think,
what's going on there.
well, I think that that means the society that we have around us is not as real as it needs to be. See, and that's why for me, I have like very few friends, but they're really good friends, very transparent, very honest. And to me, that's just the only way I live. I don't have a very expensive social life because I don't even care for that. I don't even need that because to me, I don't have time to waste by talking something that's useless. Like I'm
Yeah.
like on a, like I have always been on a mission. That's just the way I felt, that's the way I've lived. And I love to live like that. To me, the day I'm not on a mission is the day I'm dead. I have to be dead to be not on a mission, you see? So like, yeah, so I think what you should do is know that it's good that you're aware of all these things. And it's okay to not be in a surrounding where you're not being understood and you're not being valued. And I would just create people who are more realistic. And ultimately, you know what? It may be only one and then it will become two. You know, to me, like that's just the way. And it's funny because I'm actually getting into the outdoor activity. And I saw you on one of the hike. You said yes to that. I haven't gone on any of the hike, Jessica, but I think I want to go on a hike. So maybe if you are there, it would help me because I need somebody whom I know because I don't know any of the people.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to push my, because like if you let me as an autistic adult, like, we prefer our own company and usually to be alone. And we do crave, we get really lonely because we do crave like intimacy and like to have a few close friends.
Right.
But we also don't want to be, because the biggest thing with autism for me, or the biggest actual handicap, is like I can't tune anything out. So like if I'm in a crowded room and there's 5 or 6 conversations, I can't hear anything because I'll be pinging around to every conversation and picking up pieces. And if anything's too loud or too itchy or too hot, I only eat like 2 foods. Anything tastes weird, I can't like, and that's really common with people with autism. Like a lot of us have eating disorders because we can't eat things.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been trying to push myself to get out because my house is the quiet place. But I joined the hiking club because I thought I'm getting out and I love hiking and I love the woods, but I don't have to deal with, like I couldn't go to like a bar ever.
Oh yeah, because and hiking is actually way better. That's where you're at least getting the nature, even if you're not getting anything else, and you're at least releasing all your stress with the nature. So you're actually having a good time that way. Whether you have a conversation or not, it is independent of that. So it kind of makes it better.
Well, honestly, I went on the hiking club at one of the meetings and it was great because, what are the repetitive hyperfixated interests are a big part of autism. So we tend to like pick something that we love and then just go into it so much that we almost lose ourselves in it. So like for a period, I was hyperfixated on a book series called The Wheel of Time.
Oh, wow.
And very few people have read this book series. And one of the people that was hiking had read it and watched the show, and we could spend like an hour. I think we spent the whole hike just talking about how they needed to correct errors within the show to make it more accurate to the book. And, like
that's interesting because I was
talking about stuff I love.
Yeah.
It's like,
so I think, that's good because, you just have to use the neuro-affirmative approach on yourself, right? And do whatever the hell you like. And, we all have lived enough life and we have done enough things for the social perception that now it's time that we should just do whatever we feel like it. And at the end of the day, there are people who are interested in the same and they will come to you. And the people who are not, who wants to stay in a different frequency, then they'll join their own tribe. So that way, everybody's happy and everybody's getting what they truly want, right? And I think that should be the focus of all of this. So yeah, and I mean, this is very interesting because as soon as you said about the whole tuning out thing, I was thinking about the schizophrenia only because I know that isn't that's one of the reasons that they are tagged with that particular label is that they have a harder time tuning out realities, like they're not able to live in one.
So schizophrenia is a little bit different because it's actually like, with autism, it's, genetically, it's genetic. Well, and schizophrenia has those elements too, but and neurologically, the brain, well, in both of them they are. So that's a bad example. But schizophrenia in particular, the problem is that you are responding to stimuli that's not present. So a lot of them have things like they hear voices that are not there. So, and usually they're, the most dangerous kind are like command hallucinations where they're being told things, so you have a voice that's not there, that's telling you things like, you're a piece of poop, you should kill yourself, sometimes it's not realistic. It's, a lot of times delusions come with it. Like, there's a satellite up there and it's spying on you and reading your brains and sending it to the government, and the government's going to come and get you. So it usually comes with like some paranoia where you feel like people are out to get you. Does that make sense?
Right.
So
There's a fear attached to
this
it.
wrap of delusion, hallucinations, and paranoia, where everybody's trying to get you, or at least a certain subset of people are trying to get you, and you believe that. And then there's hallucinations reinforcing that a lot of times. And, there's big delusions. Like one case I did like a long time ago in a different state. So it's not a HIPAA violation, right? The person believed that they had implanted wires in their brain, the government, to monitor and control their thoughts, and that the sprinklers in the ceiling in public buildings were sending out signals. So they had gotten arrested because they were pulling all those sprinklers out of public buildings. I worked with someone else that stood in front of Lowe's and they ended up getting arrested too. Because they believed that the doors to Lowe's were as a portal to hell. Mm-hmm. And so they were attacking people on the way to Lowe's, not because they were bad or mean. And they weren't really attacking them. They were just trying to get them to like not go in Lowe's, because they were pretty sure that they were trying to save people from hell, right? Because Lowe's was, in their mind, the portal to hell.
So I guess,
right? So it's like these really disrealities, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I mean, like, I didn't know that they can take it to the level where they are interacting, because, of course they are fearful about something, but then to the extent where they are acting on it, right? Like that's what you're saying, that they're acting on it, where they're destroying the property or distracting people. So then it becomes kind of a little bit more challenging. It's funny because now, so, you know about me, right? That I live kind of more in a spiritual realm. So when you actually said in the very beginning, when you were defining the schizophrenia, and you used the word that they kind of hear voices that are not there, and that really is interesting subject for me, and we'll probably cover that some other time. But to me, whenever somebody says it's not there, it's an interesting thing, because the whole physical world that we see is a very, very small percentage of what really is there, right? Because of the way the physical world shows up, because we have a very limited spectrum that we can see through our visual.
I mean, and I have heard it hypothesized that, back in the old days, right? Not old days 200 years ago, old days thousands of years ago, that people with mental health issues would be considered shamans because, they were responding to things that other people couldn't see or hear. So instead of assuming that they were crazy, and that they would think, hey, maybe there is really a portal to hell in Lowe's, and maybe we should be listening to that person because there's something toxic and evil in there, and maybe just don't go into Lowe's today, right? So you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like, and of course, it's an extreme situation, but at the end of the day, you wonder, right? That like when people give, like, and just even learning more about autism with you today, whatever little we did, like for 48 minutes, I actually realized that, they're just a little bit, they're just wired in a way that they're more, sensitive, they're more aware, they're more transparent. So I'm actually like, when you start realizing that, you wouldn't tag that as a disease, you would tag that as people who are kind of like more real to me. I mean, they're more tuned into the real themselves,
I mean, I think it's so complicated because you're an engineer. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm sure, Huntsville has one of the highest autism rates in the country because our city is dominated by people who are engineers, because, it's not just that we're more real. I don't think that's accurate. I think our brain likes patterns and sees it, just everything is different. But I feel like autism leans well to engineering. So anytime you meet somebody that's socially awkward and weird, who's really good at like software development, right? Or, electrical engineering, that's usually someone with autism, right? Like, and I'm sure you've met these people, right? They're
Well,
just
you're describing me right now because I'm exactly all of that, because I'm a software developer, I'm an electrical engineer. So, and you have met, and every time you and I talk, have you noticed that we can talk for hours and hours because we can continue the conversation to go to so many places.
Right, because we do think very similarly, you and I. Like we want to break everything down and analyze it. And I feel like in general, that's what, in autism, we're always trying to break everything down, analyze it. Even as little kids, they take, when on the test, we're like, did you ever take your toys apart to see how they work? Right? Because that's real common. You pull the wheels off, you just play with the wheel. You want to see how the wheel goes, how the door opens and shuts on the car. It's
Right.
not enough that you just have the car. You want to know everything about. And I feel like that's an analogy for our brains. And that works really well for engineering, software development, because you're trying to break, and for me, psychology, because I'm trying to break apart the different components of how people think and behave so that we can do things to make ourselves happier, right?
Right. And for me, I love connecting the dot, like what you explained
Yes.
about the, the autonomic nervous system that pretty much runs in the background, and the whole thing about the sympathetic and parasympathetic, right? And then you were explaining how the co-regulation was the word you used for how the animals are like helping you fill in the blanks through that process on making you feel kind of, calm down or help you relieve your stress. So you are not in the fight and flight. I love connecting the dots and understanding all that because, we are human being, and the more we understand ourselves, the better we can manage our craft. This is a human craft to me. So it's important, right?
I call it the meat machine, right?
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
it's like a robot made out of biologic material that we have to learn how to manage and control.
Exactly.
And and I mean, so in that way, what you and I do is similar, right? Because we're just trying to analyze different types of machines.
Exactly. And we just come from we both have different type of expertise. So we come from different angles. But at the end of the day, my whole thing is that let's understand each other. Let's make sense of things so we can all live in this earth as long as we're here to make the most of it, because none of us are here forever. Thanks God to that.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I would not want to be here forever.
Exactly.
No.
So I'm glad. But while we're here, I want to make the most of it. And that's why I'm kind of doing these things, because, you and I always converse on subject that can be helpful for someone else to tune in. So this has been a pretty good conversation today. I would like to ask you, as we're winding down, is there anything you would like to share with everybody who's listening, whether they have autism themselves or whether they interact with people who have autism? What would be your suggestion so that they can hopefully do a better job in interacting with them?
I mean, I feel like if you have autism, it's not about doing a better job interacting with people. It's about learning to love yourself.
Okay.
Right. Because for me, my diagnosis with autism, like I had spent my whole life beating up on myself because I couldn't act like everybody else and I couldn't relate and I couldn't figure out even how they did it or what they were doing. It all just seemed incredibly insane, all of it. Like, I'm like, I don't know what you people are doing. But once I was diagnosed, it made sense that I just don't see the world the way the rest of the world does. And that led to self-love, right? Because I am not just broken and I too stupid to understand how people work. I just don't see the world the way people see most people see the world. And so part of, to me, if you have autism, is love yourself for the different being you are, right? We don't all have to be neurotypical. And autistic people throughout history have done amazing things that neurotypical, because when we hyperfixate, we can do things that neurotypical people can never do, right? Like that's how I've written 10 books, because when I deep dive, I can accomplish anything I want to, right? So love yourself as who you are and don't try to be like everybody else. Just be who you are and find people like yourself.
Yeah, that's a great message. And that message applies to everyone, whether you're neurotypical or not, because at the end of the day, we all are different from each other, whether we have autism or not. And if you can, basically embrace all the gifts that we have, then we can actually learn about more gifts that we have hidden underneath. Because the fact that you've written all these books, because you were able to dial into that channel and be able to focus on it to create the product like a book.
Yeah.
And I was able to do that. Now, finally, I'm in the same category as you are, being an author. And my God, that was truly the key of that I decided and I did it. So I think we will leave everybody who's listening to this as that just love yourself and shine your light as bright as you can, and don't let the world dim your light.
I love that. That's beautiful. That's a perfect place to end.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. And we will end for now. Thank you.